Carlson is up next. Have a good night, everybody.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Rudy Giuliani and a number of the president's other lawyers held a press conference today on the topic of voter fraud. If you didn't actually see it, you've probably heard about it by now. Giuliani, along with the former federal prosecutor called Sidney Powell and a number of others, alleged that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. To demonstrate that, they exhibited some of what they found after 2 weeks of investigating. The presentation went on for 90 minutes with many different threads, which we'll tell you about in a moment. How you viewed it depended largely on who you voted for. Trump voters seemed hopeful that it might change the election results. The left, and virtually every single person in all of the news media, immediately dismissed it as an embarrassing clown show as well as a threat to the republic. The very same people who swore that Vladimir Putin's agents controlled the U.S. government called it a conspiracy theory. Of course they did. We'll have more on that in a minute. But first and more important, there is another way to look at what we saw this afternoon, and you don't have to be a partisan or even interested in the election to understand it. A lot of Americans believe this election was rigged. They're not saying that because they're crazy. They're not just saying it because they're mad. They mean it. And that's a potentially fatal problem for this country. Elections aren't merely, quote, central to democracy. Elections are democracy. Voting is the way the public expresses its will. It's all people have. If elections don't work, our entire system doesn't work. Everything in this country depends on fair elections. And it's obvious even now that we don't have them. When access to basic information is restricted and weaponized by a partisan billionaire class, and it is, you can't have a fair election. By definition, it is not possible. Google and Facebook are far greater threats to our system than Russia has ever been, and we need to fix that immediately. In the meantime, though, the voting itself, which was the topic of today's press conference, let's assess what the president's lawyers said about it today. Their allegations matter regardless of what the eventual outcome is. Rudy Giuliani began by saying the Democrats stole the election, and they did it with a coordinated fraud in a number of states. Giuliani did not conclusively prove that, as every newsreader on television promptly informed you. But he did raise legitimate questions, and in some cases he pointed to what appeared to be real wrongdoing. At one point, Giuliani held up an affidavit from a worker from the city of Detroit called Jesse Jacobs. The affidavit alleges fraud in Detroit's polling places. Here's part of Giuliani's explanation.
She was assigned to voting duties in September, and she was trained by the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. She was basically trained to cheat. She said that I was instructed by my supervisor to adjust the mailing date of these absentee ballot packages to be dated earlier than when they were actually sent in. The supervisor made that announcement for all workers to engage in that fraudulent practice. That's not me saying that. That's this American citizen saying that under oath.
The city of Detroit has denied that specific allegation, surprisingly or not. But what Rudy Giuliani said is correct. This is the sworn statement of an American citizen, apparently an eyewitness to it, made under oath under the penalty of perjury, so you cannot dismiss it out of hand. Jacob goes on to say that her supervisor told her not to check the photo IDs of voters when they arrived. She says she saw city employees coaching voters on who to vote for, as well as voters voting more than once. Is any of that provable? Is it true? Well, we should find out, and not because Michigan is a swing state. Voter fraud is a direct attack on our democracy. But the media don't want to know. They're not interested. If you watch the coverage after the press conference today, you saw credentialed reporters, some of whom we know and like, actually, refuse even to acknowledge it. No mention whatsoever of the contents of what they described as, quote, what he says are sworn affidavits. What he says? Well, why don't you check? Giuliani says that this affidavit from Detroit has been made public, but they can't be bothered to check. Instead, they launch into editorials about how dishonest and crazy Rudy Giuliani is, as if their job was to rebut Rudy Giuliani.
Down his face, while Trump campaign lawyer Sidney Powell made truly wild allegations about how the election was rigged by communist money from Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez, who has been dead for 7 years. that's where we are. This is where we are. So we are now seeing the actual coup attempt. This is not about recounts that they are entitled to under law. It's not about barrages of frivolous lawsuits over this 100 ballots or that 100 ballots or signature matches. No, it is an attempt to use Republican loyalty to Donald Trump to subvert and frankly overturn the results of a Democratic election. They are just attempting straight up to subvert the will of the people and overturn a democratically elected government. We saw the first indications of this when the Republicans on the Wayne County, Michigan Board of Canvassers refused to certify the election before backing down. Well, then today, the Republican chair of the four-person committee, Monica Palmer, said the president called her himself after the meeting ended. And last night, both she and her fellow Republican board member, William Hartman, signed affidavits saying they want to rescind their vote certifying the election. They want to take it back after Monica Palmer talked to the president. Even though that does not appear to be a real thing, I think that ship has sailed. Now, Trump has also invited the Republican leaders of the Michigan House and Senate to meet with him at the White House tomorrow, even though both have said they have no plans for any long-shot maneuvers aimed at the Republican legislature naming an alternate set of pro-Trump electors for Michigan. They're trying to just overturn the election and install the president in power. Now, I don't want to freak people out. This should not be giving you a knot in your stomach about the outcome. It's not going to work, okay? There's not some new ball game they're playing now. It is doomed to failure for a bunch of reasons we'll get into. But that should not diminish what they're trying to do. They're trying to do the thing. They're trying to overturn the election. Today, in an exclusive interview with Jonathan Capehart, which is coming up tonight at 10 p.m. on MSNBC, President Barack Obama pointed out it is not just Donald Trump who is to blame.
Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States. Kamala Harris will be the next vice president. I have been troubled, like I think every American, whether you're a Republican or Democrat or independent, should be troubled when you start having attempts to block, negate, overturn the people's vote when there's no actual evidence that there was anything illegal or fraudulent taking place. These are just bald assertions. They've been repeatedly rejected by the courts. And I think I'm less surprised by Donald Trump doing this. You know, he has shown only a flimsy relationship to the truth. I'm more troubled that you're seeing a lot of Republican officials go along with it, not because they actually believe it, but because they feel intimidated by it. And the degree to which you've seen some news outlets that cater to the right and the conservative viewpoint somehow try to prop up these bogus claims.
Now, to be perfectly clear, we did not dismiss any of it. We don't dismiss anything anymore, particularly when it's related to technology. We've talked to too many Silicon Valley whistleblowers. We've seen too much. After 4 years, this may be the single most open-minded show on television. We literally do a UFO segment, not because we're crazy or had even been interested in the subject, but because there is evidence that UFOs are real and everyone lies about it. There's evidence that a lot of things that responsible people used to dismiss out of hand as ridiculous are in fact real. And we don't care who mocks it. The louder the Yale Political Science Department and the staff of the Atlantic magazine scream, "Conspiracy theory," the more interested we tend to be. That's usually a sign you're over the target. A lot of people with impressive sounding credentials in this country are frauds. They have no idea what they're doing. They're children posing as authorities, and when they're caught, they lie and then they blame you for it. We see that every day. It's the central theme of this show and will continue to be. So that's a long way of saying we took Sidney Powell seriously. We had no intention of fighting with her. We've always respected her work. We simply wanted to see the details. How could you not want to see them? So we invited Sidney Powell on the show. We would have given her the whole hour. We would have given her the entire week, actually, and listened quietly the whole time at rapt attention. That's a big story. But she never sent us any evidence, despite a lot of requests, polite requests. Not a page. When we kept pressing, she got angry and told us to stop contacting her. When we checked with others around the Trump campaign, people in positions of authority, they told us Powell has never given them any evidence either, nor did she provide any today at the press conference. Powell did say that electronic voting is dangerous, and she's right, we're with her there. But she never demonstrated that a single actual vote was moved illegitimately by software from one candidate to another. Not one. So why are we telling you this? We're telling you this because it's true. And in the end, that's all that matters, the truth. It's our only hope. It's our best defense. And it's how we're different from them. We care what's true, and we know you care too. That's why we told you. Maybe Sidney Powell will come forward soon with details on exactly how this happened and precisely who did it. Maybe she will. We are certainly hopeful that she will. What happened with the vote counting this month, and at the polling places in Detroit, and the polling places in Philadelphia, and so much else, actually matters. It matters no matter who you voted for. It matters whether or not you think this election is already over. Until we know the answers to those questions conclusively and we can agree on them, this country will not be united. Greg Gutfeld is the host of the Greg Gutfeld Show.
Expected to see, so the scanner is operating appropriately. They clear those off, and then they literally will run through all 5 million plus ballots through those high-speed scanners to get a true recount again of those ballots one more time, and then that will be the final version of the ballots that were voted.
And approximately how long does that, if that was to be requested, how long would that take?
Well, we've never done one before, so this is kind of new territory for us. I mean, we just did a hand recount in 10 days, which was an amazing lift, working with Voting Works and some other people out there that made our counties did amazing work. They really staffed up and did it right. It takes about, we did the math, we can do about 50 ballots a minute on each individual scanner. There's about 200 of them in the state. So we think the small counties will get done first. We'll probably redeploy some of those smaller county scanners to the big counties to help them get through it. So hopefully we can get through it pretty quickly. The law is on the 0.5%. They can request it within 2 business days. So since we're going to be certifying tomorrow, they have until Tuesday to make the request. Of course, Thanksgiving is next week. So depending on when the request comes in, we can start Monday. We can start the following Monday.
Gabriel Sterling, really appreciate all your hard work and everybody in the state. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And thank those counties for the real hard work. Yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate it. As promised, Dana Bash is here along with CNN election law analyst Rick Hasson, author of Election Meltdown, Dirty Tricks, Distrust, and the Threat to American Democracy. And what an apt title, man. Dana, your reporting is that President Trump knows he's lost but is delaying the inevitable out of revenge. Explain what you've heard.
Right. Well, a source who is in contact with the president says that what the president knows is that in his heart of hearts is that he will not win. We've heard that from other sources as well. But what this source added was that what the president is saying pretty explicitly is he feels that the Democrats, when the president won in 2016, tried to make his win illegitimate by the Russia investigation, the dossier, and everything that went along with it. And so he is using their playbook. That's his thinking. And he's, you know, I use the word payback. This is not what my source used, but there's no other way to put it. That is what the president is doing. One of many reasons why he is continuing to not allow the Biden transition, to get funds, to get briefings, and also much more destructively continuing to call the election results fraudulent where there is no evidence, as you showed with your opening with the Rudy Giuliani and company press conference.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering how the president views Giuliani and this legal, you know, team. I guess they are, you know, the press conference, these fruitless rabbit holes, things are just, you know, in courtroom after courtroom, things are being rejected, tossed out, or the lawyers stepping down or taking back, you know, withdrawing their case.
The president wants somebody out there fighting for him. And the president wants somebody out there going down whatever rabbit hole they feel comfortable doing. And Rudy Giuliani is pretty much the only one left who will go down those rabbit holes and have the kind of press conference he had today with the few people who were standing by him. Other lawyers who have a lot more credibility with election law are nowhere to be found, and there's a reason for that, Anderson.
Rick, I want to read something that you wrote earlier today about the president's efforts in Michigan. You said, this is very dangerous for a democracy as it is an attempt to thwart the will of the voter through political pressure from the president. Even though it is extremely unlikely to work, it is profoundly anti-democratic and a violation of the rule of law. It's inexcusable. Does it become even more dangerous for a democracy the longer this goes on?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly the president has every right, as any candidate does, to bring legal cases and to challenge results if there's a reason to challenge them. But we've now gone, we're coming up, closer to the deadline for when everything has to be certified. They've produced no evidence. In a filing today in Pennsylvania for a preliminary injunction where you're supposed to provide your evidence, they said, we'd like to bring in an expert. But they didn't provide any expert yet. They've got nothing legally in the hopper that plausibly is going to show fraud, plausibly is going to show any problem in any state. So what they're trying to do now is a naked power play. The idea is we're just going to try and get these state legislatures to just announce an alternative slate of electors, declare Trump won with no basis at all. I mean, that is really the opposite of the rule of law. And the longer this goes on, not only does it endanger the transition in terms of COVID and all that, it undermines people's confidence in the fairness of the process. There are millions of people now who falsely believe that voting machines are being manipulated, that Biden is cheating, that it's some large conspiracy. It's just really deteriorating the whole environment in which we have our democratic process take place in.
And Dana, I mean, perhaps most, I don't know if it's not surprising, I guess, but one of the, I mean, you kind of expect the president to do, this kind of stuff. This is from his playbook. All these Republican senators standing by, being party to it, and sort of, sagely nodding their heads and saying, well, yes, 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 we must look into all. I mean, I don't think we fully understood as a country how vulnerable our system is to manipulation, because, Tom Friedman has pointed out, and others, that it's often based on norms, not necessarily something that's codified in law.
Based on norms, based on shame, and leaders not wanting to be shamed, not wanting to be the one or the ones who break those norms that are the pillars of this democracy. And you're exactly right. We are seeing that deteriorate right now in a pretty big way. And they're not just nodding their heads, they're enabling this president in a very big way. Now, when you talk to Republicans privately, what they say to a person is what I reported that the president says. They know he's not going to win. But there are several reasons why they are continuing to nod their heads and to enable him. The most important from their point of view is power. And by power, I mean they want to keep control of the United States Senate. And there are 2 outstanding races in Georgia. That is not going to happen until January 5th. And they don't want to do anything to make the president so mad that he will either, throw a tantrum and say, I'm not going to go help Republicans in Georgia, or even undermine Republicans in Georgia. That's a real concern.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, doesn't that give them too much credit? Because after that January 5th date, their next excuse is, well, now we're just terrified of the base. We're just terrified of all the president's supporters, so we still can't talk. We still can't speak out.
It's all the above. You're exactly right.
Yeah. Dana Bash, thank you. Dana's going to stick around. Rick Hassan, thanks so much. Coming up next with the White House strategy. I mean, you can't call it strategy. The White House careening forward movement will attempt to be. Later, Bill Gates on new vaccines and how to bridge the gap between now and when they actually become widely available, and what he thinks the next few months look like. A lot of great information from Bill Gates coming up.
Before we talk about tax-smart investing.
The election is over is not going to get him to stop. It's just not. But what it will do, obviously, is turn his ire towards them. You got to remember, politicians are going to act in their own political self-interest. And in the short term, it is in the political self-interest for Republicans to stand by the president. Something that people, I think, forget is that while I'm sure that their office phone lines are getting hammered with people criticizing them for their position, but I promise you they're also getting hammered by their constituents who are saying, why are you not out defending the president? Why are you not? He says there's enough votes to overturn the election. What are you doing to overturn the election? And so that's the pressure that they feel. And so when they know that they can't actually overturn, they can't make him stop, Right. And they know that he's actually powerless to overturn the election. The easiest thing to do is to just sort of wait him out. And I think that's what you're seeing.
I totally agree with that as like descriptive analysis, and I think you're right. It's important to remember there's pressure on both sides. But I mean, maybe I'm just an incorrigible moralist, but normatively that doesn't cut the mustard. Like, Paul Ryan should speak up, John Boehner should speak up, the people that are not in public office should speak up, but the people in public office should speak up. They should say this is wrong. Like, that really does seem important to me.
Well, I don't think there's any question that it's wrong, and I think you're seeing more Republicans every day. You had Fred Upton just this evening, who was the former chairman of the committee, speaking up. I think that what Republicans need to understand is that while it is in their self-interest in the short term to stand by him, it is not in their self-interest long term. If you tell enough of your voters that voting doesn't matter, that elections are rigged, that democracy doesn't work, that is going to come back and bite you. And I think that's what they need to understand in the long term, that there are consequences for the party, for your self-interest, of course, for the entire country as well. So I think that as these states continue to certify their elections, I think Georgia will do tomorrow, and have a couple more on Monday, everybody will sort of understand and they'll move on. But they really have no incentive. Elected officials have no incentive right now in the short term to hit it. They just don't.
Brendan, it strikes me as you say that it's not the first time in your career you've taken a moral argument and translated it into an interest of raw sense. Translated into the language of raw self-interest so that it gets a hearing. So I appreciate you doing that. Hopefully that will land. Brendan Buck, thank you very much.
Yeah. A reporter in the country was there with the story of the century. A man called George Floyd, a convicted felon, had died, and the world's Fortune 500 companies collectively found a culprit. It wasn't the fatal levels of fentanyl in his system or the blocked artery. It was systemic racism. So naturally, Minneapolis burned for days. Democrats called for defunding the police. Then the media moved on. Now we know why they moved on and have never really returned. Defunding the police has been a disaster for every person in Minneapolis. According to the Minneapolis Police Office, 100 cops have already left the force this year. That's more than double the usual number. Meanwhile, murders in Minneapolis are up 50%. 500 people have been shot in Minneapolis so far in 2020. That's the highest number in a decade. Those numbers tell you a lot of things, including why Democrats lost House seats across the country, and particularly in western Minnesota, along with 6 state Senate races there. People want security, it turns out. They want it above all, and they will vote for any political party they think will provide it. That's why Richard Nixon won the single biggest landslide in American history in 1972, 49 states. It wasn't because of his personality. Nixon won because he promised what his opponent refused to promise: law and order. Not repression, not fascism, law and order. Simple concepts upon which all human civilization is built. Local politicians in Minneapolis didn't understand that concept. It was too sophisticated for them. So this summer, we were treated to interviews like this one, which feel more like performance art that was accidentally somehow broadcast on the television. Watch this.
Do you understand that the word dismantle or police free also makes some people nervous? For instance, what if in the middle of the night my home is broken into? Who do I call?
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
So only people with a certain sort of frivolous, overpriced education talk that way, as you well know. But more to the point, as a practical matter, if you want people to flee your city, that's exactly what you say. We know that for certain. 50 years ago, half of Brooklyn moved to Long Island within a year. Why? Because crime rose. So normal people split. Crime is the only thing, not global warming, not systemic racism, not any other problem we may face. It's the only thing that will make people leave the neighborhoods they grew up in, the neighborhoods they raised their children in, where their friends are, their churches are. They'll leave if their lives are threatened. Period.
And by the way, has amazing opportunities right in front of him if he would see it. He could help the Congress get things done in December that need to get done. He could help the party win races in Georgia in January. He's already delivered on the vaccine, and the economy seems to be more resilient than people thought. He could really exit on an upswing here if he thought about it. But it doesn't look like Rudy Giuliani had thought about that today, and it doesn't look like the president has any interest in reining him in. So I was mightily disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, Abby, we now know that the great American tradition of the peaceful transfer of presidential power, which people around the world look to the United States and you know, are amazed at our history of that, because you don't see that in a lot of places. But we now know it's not as secure as we thought it was. I mean, should we get used to the idea that presidents may not honor that idea? Is this going to be the new norm?
And I really hope not. I think that the loss of that, even just for this period, is a real tragedy, and it's a real disgrace, as Scott just put it. Look, this is a president who has flouted a lot of norms for his entire time in political life. But at the same time, what is so much more distressing about this moment is that he is being enabled and supported by many, many people who know better, who do know better, who understand that, as Scott said, this is not an election that is going to be overturned. When you look at the United States and its standing around the world, what standing do we have now to tell countries around the world that they ought to respect the results of their election, when the sitting president of the United States is saying now that the only way that he would accept a loss is, I mean, actually, that's not even what he's saying. What he's saying is that he will never accept a loss. I mean, that is an anti-democratic notion, and it should be called out for what it is. So, yeah, I mean, Scott put it really perfectly, but I would just point out one thing that I gently disagree with my friend Scott on, which is that, yes, this election is somewhat close, but it's not as close as the 2016 election was. President Trump's margin over Hillary Clinton in Michigan was 10,000 votes 4 years ago. Now Biden's lead is 157,000 votes. At the end of this process, Biden will have a more significant lead than Trump did 4 years ago and would have won the popular vote. So you can characterize it as somewhat close, but it's really not that close.
But then I think that Scott makes a really good point, which is there was an alternative, you know, future that the president could have charted. There was an alternative path he could have taken, and, you know, make sure the Republicans get both senators get elected in Georgia, you know, end on a high note, set up his legacy. I mean, maybe he's not thinking about his legacy at all, or he just kind of assumes the name Trump is, you know, all the legacy he needs. But the history is not going to look back kindly on this absurd, I don't even know what to call a spectacle that we're living through.
This is the hallmark of the Trump era, and that is that Donald Trump himself can't get out of his own way. I mean, we could go down the list of real accomplishments that he can claim from his presidency, from renegotiating a trade deal to, you know, criminal justice reform. And he won't do it. He can't do it because the noise of him kicking and screaming and having a temper tantrum about his loss is completely drowning that out. And I just have to say that Scott is a lifelong Republican and is a loyal Republican. And the fact that you, Scott, just sounded so normal, and the fact that that normal tone and tenor and the content of what you said was so jarring in its normalcy tells us everything we need to know. I mean, you just said what the basic expectation should be of elected officials in your party, and we haven't heard very many of them at all.
So, Scott, obviously, look, there's, you know, there's no way to predict the next 60-something days, but once the president has left, and you know, whatever, he'll set up, you know, he'll be an alternative, he'll have a megaphone, you know, he'll still be a big power, obviously, in the Republican Party. What happens? I mean, do things, you know, there's a lot of Republicans who will still be beholden to him, still fearful he's going to run again, or happy he's going to run again. I'm talking about Republican senators and congresspeople, happy he'll run again, you know, wanting him to raise money for them, for their campaigns, and wanting the support of his base. So does this remain the party of Trump from now on?
Well, I mean, he'll remain an enormously popular figure. I'm sure he's harboring thoughts about running in 2024, which is why I'm sort of dumbfounded that he doesn't take advantage of the opportunities in front of him to end on a high note. He could continue to be the most popular Republican in the country, and somebody who's sought after to do all the things you just said, fundraising and campaigning and otherwise. And I'm sure that he will by some, but he is freezing the party. I mean, you have a whole host of people who want to run for president, but most of them are beholden to him or are trying to inherit his audience. And so as long as he's out there rattling around, which I assume he will be for the next several years, all those people are frozen. And I don't think you could get the nomination in 2024 by running as sort of an anti-Trump, like Governor Hogan might do if he were to run. So he is going to have a chilling impact on all those people who've been loyal to him, but now want to have their own chance in the spotlight. Look, I think Republicans are enormously grateful to Trump for beating the Clinton machine, for taking on the media every day, for doing some of the things that they don't think their establishment leaders were willing to do, taking on some of those fights. But at some juncture, the institutions of the country take precedent over what you hoped to have happened in the election. And that's what we're up against right now, political reality versus what they wanted to have happen, and they're just not the same. And what I saw today, Anderson, I was stunned. And Donald Trump has the chance to exit office on a real high note, on a real upswing, and instead he's going to exit office with Rudolph Giuliani on TV with his hair gel streaming down his face. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Scott Jennings, appreciate it. Dana Bash, Abby Phillip, thank you. Just ahead, breaking news from the CDC about Thanksgiving travel as coronavirus cases and deaths continue to climb. And we're going to have a long talk with Bill Gates on the recent developments on the vaccine, as well as what he thinks the next year looks like and when things may actually return to some semblance of normal. Fascinating discussion with Bill Gates ahead.
Will you sell us your car today?
I don't know.
Let's never go to a dealership again.
To the U.S. government, because the promise of being able to do something quickly and having a generalized factory look great for all diseases. And so mRNA is going to be used for other infectious diseases, for cancer. This is something that had been in the pipeline. Pfizer, who got there first, funded all their own R&D, did all their own trials. They're a top-notch company. Most people do trust the FDA, and I've been watching the FDA process, and the professionals there have done a great job of making sure that even though they're moving quickly, they're not cutting corners. So the pharmaceutical industry has stepped up. There'll be many good vaccines that will, by late spring, give us high coverage and eventually global coverage, and some therapeutics that will help cut the death rate in the meantime.
I want to talk about the distribution of vaccines in a second, but just there's an emotional component to this that, I just as a citizen, when I hear, okay, these vaccines are coming 90-95% effective, there's part of me that and I'm, as big a mask wearer as anybody, and, well, not as anybody, as people who wear masks are, and I wish there were more of us, but there is part of me that just psychologically thinks, oh, well, as soon as the vaccine comes, I can get rid of the mask, I can go to, eat indoors again. It's not, is that, I feel like that's something I have to guard against. I don't want to get my hopes up in that sense, but also, is that a danger in these vaccines that people think suddenly it's a silver bullet?
That's right. Ideally it would get people to say, hey, I have to do my best behavior for these 6 to 8 months until the coverage is high. We're likely to get 2,000 deaths a day in January and February, so up to about a peak level there. And it's tragic. It's going to add up to several 100,000 lives lost just in the U.S. alone. And we'll look back and say, why couldn't we convince people to just stay the course until we got up to that very high vaccination level, which will be probably late spring.
I think about, you hear about soldiers who get killed 10 hours or 4 hours before an armistice is signed, and people who in the early 1990s died from AIDS, days, weeks before the cocktail was available. The idea that, I think the latest from Chris Murray's team at IMHE is 400,000 dead by the 1st of February. I mean, the idea that, you know, it took us 10 months to get to 250,000, that we could get to 400,000 by the 1st of February is just shocking. And the idea that it's within sight of a vaccine, it just seems so tragic and so incumbent on all of us to try to lower those numbers.
I couldn't agree more. The good news should pull us together, you know, help us to say, okay, it is a bit of a sacrifice, but you know, we will get back to normal. And you know, thank goodness, if this had come 5 or 10 years earlier, we wouldn't have been able to get these things going so quickly. So, you know, it's a little cacophonous how the vaccine's going to be distributed, but I assume that will get worked out. You know, we should have websites up right now where people are giving their criteria and being told, you know, when they're supposed to come get the vaccine. With that organization, I'm a little worried about how well we do that.
This is a dumb question, but do you have like the coolest mask in the world? Because I imagine, when I like to think of you, I think of you having the coolest life in the world, and although you're drinking Diet Coke, so that's not cool. But I'm a former big Diet Coke drinker. But I go for a Coke Zero, by the way. But do you have like the coolest mask, or do you just wear like a normal mask like everyone else?
We actually did a video where I was putting on lots of different masks, but the mask I wear most of the time is just a nice black mask. Sometimes I wear those kind of surgical blue ones, not very fashionable.
Well, that makes you even cooler. So the next big hurdle, obviously, is distribution. I mean, I think that's the next big hurdle in terms of the vaccine. Distribution, storage of the vaccine. To me, it sounds like it's got to be stored in special refrigerators that are very, very low temperature. Can't be in like the hotel mini fridge. Am I right about that? When you know more than anybody about, you know, getting vaccines out there, how tough is this job?
In the United States, the logistics are handleable. Pfizer built a box that uses liquid CO2 dry ice to keep the vaccine cold. So they've thought that through pretty well. So as soon as we can manufacture these vaccines, if we identify the priority people, the logistics will be just fine. The U.S. has a lot of delivery capacity, and keeping these things cold is hard, but it won't hold us back.
A lot of the distribution is going to end up falling on the shoulders of the incoming Biden administration. We are obviously in this, you know, I don't even know what adjective to use to describe it, but surreal, I guess, would be one situation that the Trump team has not initiated transition, which means that the Biden team isn't being briefed, et cetera. How big a problem is that? I mean, how important is a smooth transition from one to the other in terms of vaccine distribution?
Yeah, the country's actually had some pretty tough situations during presidential transitions, which is bad luck. It makes how do we register people about how they took the vaccine, you know, particularly given that the voice of science hasn't been foremost here, with the top CDC people being people you know and who are talking about their plans. So I think it could slow things down a bit. I'm still hopeful that you'll see cooperation kick in here pretty soon. I think the Biden team of people is a very good set of people who have track records as scientists working on healthcare. You know, you don't have any you know, outliers in terms of not believing in public health. So it looks good to me. But you know, every day you waste in terms of not getting that distribution and that clear message on behavior could result in lives lost.
Has the Biden team reached out to you? Can you say?
Yes, we're allowed to talk to various people, and so you know, we have long-standing relationships with a lot of those people and a good, rich dialogue. Of course, nothing. You know, they don't have any real impact until January 20th, so we're continuing to talk to the current team, but it's a bit fragmented with, you know, voices that aren't all that constructive.
Bill, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back because I want to talk about how you see the coming months.
Black markets are all .com/lifeline.
And what he is saying in his rhetoric, it is dangerous. And unfortunately, the president watched his audition repeatedly on Fox News. And I say that completely 100% seriously, because this is how the president identifies people who stay on his message for their new jobs. And this is a man who has control. And he advises the president in these dangerous messages. And unfortunately, the president's followers and his supporters and his voters follow this rhetoric. And it is killing Americans today.
Nearly 2,000 deaths today, which I just can't quite process. I want to play something the President-elect Biden said today about the real problem right now with the transition. I mean, they have a huge logistical problem they need handed over. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Unfortunately, because of the lack of a sermon, as they say, that's a fancy word these days, but until the head of the GSA says that we, in fact, our team, this transition team, our team, the senator and I, have in fact are the likely winners. And until she does that, we don't have access to all the information that we need to get from all the various agencies.
Having worked on that task force, how crucial is that?
It's critical, and he is absolutely correct in the fact that there is so much data, and information out there in terms of all the research that has taken place by a group of people who actually cared and did the work behind the scenes. And they need access to that if they want to move forward, if we want to support them and they want to hit the ground running come in January. There is no reason for the behavior right now. We are in a critical transition during the country's biggest pandemic, the biggest pandemic of our generation. And what is happening right now is just petty politics and childish behavior by a White House who knows better. They know exactly what they're doing. They're playing games. But the problem is this isn't taxes. This isn't just some minor issue. This is people's lives.
Olivia Troy, who I want to put this tweet up, had recently drove 6 days, 4,300 miles to El Paso to bring your mom back home. El Paso, one of the worst hit spots in the country. You're from El Paso, and I was psyched that you were able to do that, and I hope she's doing well, and thank you for making some time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Next, in order for Republicans to maintain control of the Senate, they need to ensure the re-election of 2 Georgia senators.
Federal government, a bunch of oversight for curriculum and all kinds of other things that they want to enforce at local levels to deny parents control. They want to take away charter schools. They want to take away private schools. They want the only option to be public schooling. And they know that if they have any competition, they're just not going to measure up. And that's, that's why they want to do it. This is a power thing. And we've seen this before with unions. The teachers union is the largest union in the country with about 3 million members. And already we've seen that either the head of the UFT or the head of the NEA is going to be the head of the Department of Education. And then what? Then what happens to all of the kids who actually need an education?
If you're a Democratic politician, and like the governor of California, and you're sending your children to private school because you know it's better for them to be in class, and you're shutting down or allowing the unions to shut down the public schools, I mean, I think you have to answer for that on some moral level. I mean, I think that's really wrong, don't you?
I think so as well. Yeah, I called around yesterday, so my son is in 5th grade, and I called around yesterday to see what was going on with the private schools, the ones that cost $50,000 a year. They're all open. A couple of them, when I called to say, are you open? They were like, yeah, wait, who are you? Why are you calling?
Exactly.
Because I want to know, why is my kid not getting educated?
It's true. I mean, I guess the good news from your perspective is a lot of those $50,000 a year schools are really, really bad. Really bad. Trust me. Right. Libby, it's great to see you. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks so much.
Well, Senate Republicans released a report today about communications between Joe Biden's son and the Communist Party of China. Other media organizations buried this story. We're not going to bury it. We'll tell you what's in that report, something that's very interesting. Next.
How often do you get a good night's sleep?
I'm tossing and turning, and I'm worried.
The U.S. to get that right, then it will be as we start to get vaccines out to the developing countries.
And you've done global vaccination efforts, polio and many things, and how, by comparison in terms of difficulty globally, how does this distribution effort seem? I know you said it's complex. I think that seems like an understatement.
Yeah, well, the urgency and the numbers are pretty daunting. You know, if you end up with all 2-dose vaccines, you know, we need over 10 billion doses to get to a high percentage of the world. And, you know, it's during a pandemic where you don't want to infect people. You have more bad rumors that are confusing people here than probably any other case. But we've seen with polio, you know, where we're down to only 2 countries with wild polio left, that even in tough places where the rumors will swirl, if we get the message out right, we get high coverage. In fact, Africa has now gone 3 years without any wild polio. So
that's amazing.
At a time, we thought for a while we'd never achieve that, but that's there. So we're very close to the end on that one. And
I mean,
a lot
you
of good lessons. Well, there's a group that includes the U.S. CDC. Rotary International deserves immense credit. WHO, UNICEF, and our foundation, those are the 5 leaders of this polio eradication.
New York City just shut down schools yesterday. You think that's a wise move?
I'm afraid so, even though there's this huge long-term cost, and I hope we can get those schools back in operation. You know, if we can get, say, the teachers to be prioritized, I think then the unions will see that as an appropriate thing. You know, I do think the antibody therapies can start to bring the death rate down, hopefully by early next year. But we're making hard trade-offs here. That some jobs like construction and manufacturing, they have figured out protocols where the likelihood of infection is very low. So we're smarter, and some of those things that in the spring, last spring, that we had to discontinue, some of those can be allowed because the protocols are very, very good. Unlike the bar, where you're talking loud and in pretty close proximity, even under the new restrictions.
And obviously, holidays have been catalysts for infection jumps. We saw with Memorial Day, July 4th, Labor Day, next week, Thanksgiving, then Christmas, Hanukkah. Is there any doubt that Thanksgiving could end up being a nationwide super spreader event? Even though the CDC issued guidance today telling people not to travel, obviously people are going to travel.
Yeah, I heard that people were buying smaller turkeys, so maybe that means people are gathering in smaller groups. Certainly, you know, I'll be with less family members this Thanksgiving than I'd like to be. You know, and of course, just seeing them on the screen is not quite the same. But, you know, by next Thanksgiving, the vaccine, the great innovation there, will have brought this to an end. So, you know, one more round, probably 6 to 8 months, we're asking people to make sacrifices to save a lot of lives. And then wearing the mask, which I don't consider that much of a sacrifice.
So just to be clear, you personally are having less family at Thanksgiving. You're not going to have what you would normally do, and that's something you would actually recommend for people just from a purely health standpoint?
Absolutely.
We know the guidance is around what we should and shouldn't do when it comes to COVID. We also have friends and families that are more relaxed in their approach to COVID, to say the least, or simply don't abide by recommendations. What's your advice on how people should, you know, go about dealing with that in their lives? I mean, it's just a difficult thing to deal with.
It's awkward when, you know, like the family of your kid's best friend, you're saying, okay, how much should we talk to them about how they're dealing with this? Or how do they ask you, you know, okay, what is your family doing? Because, you know, if you let friends get together at all, then there's a certain disease connectiveness that creates some risk. And, you know, I think we have to be pretty aggressive about figuring out, okay, amongst all the indirect contacts I have, are we doing things in a safe way? I mean, literally, there's no part of the country now that hasn't been touched in a pretty big way. And it was predictable that the people who were more lax, that eventually the disease would get there. There was a lot of talk about that. Sadly, it ended up being true, even in towns smaller than I expected it to get to, which it's deeply, deeply unfortunate.
You sort of touched on this, but I mean, you know, the bottom line question everyone wants to know is when will things go back to normal, which is an unknowable at this point, obviously. We don't know, you know, there's still unknowns about the vaccines. We haven't really talked about therapeutics, but there are improvements in therapeutics. But in terms of playing out the next 3 months, 6 months, a year, is it realistic to think by next spring there could be some semblance of normality in the U.S. or next summer? You know,
yeah, I would say very likely by the summer, a lot of things will be back to normal. Now, you know, there'll still be a lot of people outside the United States, and that assumes that we get these other approvals and we get the logistics right. But yes, I'm very hopeful that by summer, we will be able to go back to offices and open up those restaurants and bars and say, okay, we are in a completely different stage than right now, where we're headed into this significant increase. I mean, today, you know, was just another record day with almost 2,000 deaths.
I could see, though, even in the summer, even if I've taken the vaccine, I could see, and I would take the vaccine if I could get it, I could see still carrying a mask with me if I found myself on a particularly crowded subway, or if I found myself in some situation. I feel like masks are, at least for me, here to stay, whether it's constant or not.
Well, the amazing thing is how little flu we're seeing, and that's the behavioral change. The mask has very little downside. You know, and yet, so there'll be some residual. You know, will we have big sports events by then, or does that take even longer? But certainly, you know, to lay the groundwork so that the next school year is completely normal, we can get the whole country, every city back into school. I think that's achievable and a very important goal to have in mind.
Well, Bill, as I said, the first time we got to interview Sanjay and I was March 26th, and you've been just a calming and such an authoritative and smart voice on this, and I just, as a citizen, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and get information across, because it's in this crazy, difficult, surreal time that we live in, it is nice to talk to somebody who knows exactly what they're talking about and has some perspective on this. So thank you very much.
And a little bit of good news, too. So
yes, even better.
Thanks.
Bill Gates. The news continues. Let's hand it over to Chris for Cuomo Prime Time. Chris?
That was great, Coop. Thank you very much. I'm Chris Cuomo. Welcome to Prime Time. We've got Tony Fauci tonight, and we're going to do a big walk through urgent COVID matters. But first, we have major election developments on our watch. Georgia's audit is over. The state with a Republican governor and officials in charge of the election, they say Biden won. They counted the ballots. There was an adjustment, but it didn't matter. That's a big win. But the biggest win for Biden today, I argue, came courtesy of Rudy Giuliani. What he suggested today on live television revealed the truth. There is no rational argument for delay by Trump. Not anymore. And there is no further justification, not that there ever was, for dead-headed denial by his party. Literally, judging what Rudy said today, I have only heard its equal in an intervention with someone who was literally insane. Now, everybody is
process the counting of all the ballots and every one of the states that we're talking about, but person after person saying, no, they weren't allowed to see anything. Now, they all point to an election system that is broken. You would think every American cares. One that better be fixed, or it's going to keep happening, and I could predict tonight, likely get worse. Using voting machines. Now imagine this. This is what we know, and we'll get into more details. Republicans, Democrats, the liberal media, when do they ever agree on anything? Well, in the lead up to this election, Democrats, conservatives, the liberal media, even a liberal professor, all agreed on Dominion software. We deserve answers. Why didn't the American people have the best? And now we know this.
know this about the media mob. Oh, we got to move on. Oh, this is terrible. I don't want to hear their lectures. Democrats, they don't care about any of this. Why? Because their chosen candidate is in the lead. Journalism, I said in 2007, it's dead. The president labeled it right. It's fake news. 99% of the media now is nothing more than the press arm of all things Biden, Democratic Socialist. We know that. And one of the
thing is going on. I can't stop it when but it's okay. Now you're going to see how a person does this. MacGyver's this at home. There's the way that I can hear the control room. Put this on back here. Hold on. I told you. This will work. Oops. Sort of worked. Here's the microphone. Put this on back here so it's not too distracting. This is how the sausage is made. All right. Is that good? Okay. So, where was I? Cable on my shoulder. Yeah, I think the cable might just stay on my shoulder, you guys. I'm not sure there's anything I can do about that. Is that better? All right? Okay. So, as I was saying, I'm in love. And Susan really is the center of my universe. And the way that I think about it is not that she is the sun and I'm a planet that orbits her. That would give too much credit to the other planets. It is, I think of it as a much more pitiful thing, that she is the planet and I am a satellite. And I'm up there sort of beep, beep, beeping at her and blinking my lights and just trying to make her happy. She really is. I'm just lucky. I am one of the lucky people on this earth who has a life like that. She is the center of my life. She's the organizing principle of my life. My relationship with Susan is the only thing at the end of the day that I would kill or die for without hesitation. And Susan has been sick with COVID these past couple of weeks. And at one point, we really thought that there was a possibility that it might kill her. And that's why I've been away. Susan tested positive 2 weeks ago. We separated from each other that day because I tested negative that day. She tested positive. So she and I have both been alone since then. While we have, I've continued to test. I've stayed negative. And she has not only been positive over this time, she's gotten sicker and sicker while I tried to care for her while still staying physically apart from her. And the bottom line is that she's going to be fine. She is recovering. She's still sick, but she's going to be okay, and we're not scared anymore like we were. But it really didn't feel like it was going going okay at the outset. And I mean, like I'm sure, warts and all, right? I'm willing to show you all of this. I don't know you at home except through this medium, but just believe me. Whatever you have calculated into your life as acceptable risk, as, inevitable risk, something that you're willing to go through in terms of this virus, because statistically, hey, probably it will be fine for you and your loved ones. I'm just here to tell you to recalibrate that. Frankly, the country needs you to recalibrate that because, broadly speaking, there's no room for you in the hospital anymore. And so we've got more people in the hospital right now than we've had since the beginning of this epidemic. It's gone up 50% in 2 weeks. Right? There isn't room for you in the hospital anymore, broadly speaking. So for the sake of your country, you really can't get sick and need to go to the hospital right now. And the only way to ensure that is to ensure that you do not get infected. But please just also know that whatever you think of your own life and however much risk you are willing to take on for yourself, that's not how this works. What you need to know is that whoever is the most important person in your life, whoever you most love and most care for and most cherish in the world, that's the person who you may lose, or who you may spend weeks up all night freaking out about and calling doctors all over the place and over again all night long, trying to figure out how to keep that person breathing and out of the hospital. Just don't, whatever you're doing, however you've calibrated risk in your life, don't get this thing. Do whatever you can to keep from getting it. For Thanksgiving next week, you really are going to have to just have it at home without people coming over. And yeah, that's going to suck, but that is going to suck so much less than you or somebody in your family getting this and getting sick. Trust me. And I think I know you well enough because I know me well enough. I'm guessing that you might be willing to risk yourself, right? Especially after all these months and all this time. It's so frustrating, right? I would have done anything. I would have moved mountains for it to have been me who was sick these past couple of weeks instead of Susan. I still would give anything for that. But this thing does not give you that choice. You can't say, I'm willing to just get it myself and play the odds. You don't get that choice. It won't necessarily be you. It'll be the person you most care about in the world, and how can you bear that? And all you can do to stop that is move heaven and earth to not get it and to not transmit it. It is just, again, I'm not going to go on about this at further length. I will just tell you personally, this thing is scary as hell. And whatever you've been willing to do to risk getting it, don't. Just don't do it.
Process that the law says they can view, dead people voting in some cases, batches of uncontested ballots turning up here and there 2 weeks later, everywhere voting system issues, and without a doubt, if we don't get to the bottom of what happened, if we don't get there, and President Trump's legal team is vowing to do that, why would you expect it to ever stop? Take a look.
Both our investigations and the very patriotic and brave American citizens that have come forward are extraordinary. Extraordinary number of people, extraordinary number of witnesses. And what emerged very quickly is there's not a singular voter fraud in one state. This pattern repeats itself in a number of states. Almost exactly the same pattern.
Now, also on this issue of Dominion software, which was used in 28 states, this is what our investigation has shown us. So we've been looking and doing a deep dive, giving you every bit of information that we have found about it. And what's really fascinating is that Democrats, Republicans, the media have all, prior to the election, been highly critical of it and other election machines before the election. In 2019, look at this, in December, 3 Democratic senators, Warren, Klobuchar, and Wyden, 1 Democratic congressman, Mark Pocan, they were sounding the alarm out. Quiet now, but they said, quote, Dominion's very limited information available in the public domain about their operations and financial performance. The 4 Democrats last year went on to highlight serious voting issues in multiple states using several different machines. Quote, in 2018 alone, voters in South Carolina were reporting machines that switched their votes. Meanwhile, scanners were rejecting paper ballots in Missouri, and busted machines were causing long lines in Indiana. Democrats said this. According to the lawmakers, researchers recently uncovered previously undisclosed vulnerabilities in nearly 3 dozen back-end election systems in 10 states. Keep in mind, similar concerns caused the state of Texas to reject Dominion voting systems on 3 separate occasions, once in 2013, then after testing it out, according to the AG and the Secretary of State, they looked into the system twice in 2019, didn't meet their standards in Texas. Meanwhile, 2018, prominent tenured professor at Princeton, specializing, believe it or not, I didn't know that such a thing existed, in election machinery and policy and security. Guy's name is Andrew Appel. He had an op-ed blasting Dominion over security concerns. 2018, the AP reported Dominion, quote, long skimped on security in favor of convenience, making it more difficult to detect intrusions. New York Times even criticized them this year. During Georgia's primary in June, they said Dominion's new machines required too much extra power for aging polling locations, blowing fuses, never powering on. In others, workers were still being trained just days before the election. They struggled with setup. They go on to say the electronic poll books also were plagued by freezing software and user error. Be keeping track, Senators Warren, Klobuchar, Wyden, tenured professor, state of Texas, the AP, the New York Times. You got people from all political persuasions surrounding these Dominion voting systems, hardly part of the vast right-wing conspiracy.
Only one American sealed Trump's fate, and that happened today. And that was Rudy Giuliani. He became a metaphor for the campaign melting into a dark puddle of deception. So what did this day mean for the future of that effort and our efforts to do anything about this pandemic. Let's talk politics, pandemic, David Gregory, Anthony Scaramucci. Gentlemen, thank you for your patience. David, where does this leave the Trump effort after what we saw today with Rudy?
Well, I thought your takedown was complete and doesn't need to be added to. It is
You
a
must.
farce. Sorry?
You must.
I must add to it. Look, I mean, it is a farce, and I think what Republicans in Washington have been waiting for is the rather quick burn of the legal challenges without evidence to play themselves out so they don't have to actually stand up and say that what's happening here is an actual erosion of democracy and failure of governance during a medical crisis that is global. So this isn't just giving the old guy some room to lick his wounds. As our reporting from Dana and Gloria indicate, the president knows what the game is here. He's just deluding himself. He is the leader of the grievance movement to try to seek revenge against Democrats, and not caring about the office he holds, he'll run it down. But I think, you know, how ridiculous Giuliani and others who are supporting these efforts seem. It's like cotton candy. It evaporates so quickly. There's nothing to it. So if you're inclined to want to believe in some sort of Venezuela, you know, communist conspiracy, which I don't think even a lot of Trump supporters want to believe in. I think there's a lot of thoughtful people out there who voted for Trump for lots of different reasons. I think it's a real blow. But it doesn't excuse your other point, which is this is now becoming a real crisis. This cannot be allowed to keep on happening. We're losing too much ground.
Anthony, how did your phone blow up today during the Rudy movement moment in terms of other Republicans who are figuring out what they do after this?
Listen, it's bad. There's a big schism inside the party. They're trying to even figure out what's going to happen at the RNC chairmanship level. The donors are super unhappy. That's not going to surprise you, Chris. The great sadness for me is you had the mayor on September 11th. I was on the show right after him, and we were talking about 9/11, and now we're fast forwarding 19 years to this debacle, which is staining and tarnishing his legacy forever. I wish somebody that really loved him would have an intervention and tell him to stay home. I don't know why no one's doing that for him. But secondarily, and more importantly, the president needs a shove now. The willing accomplices in the Senate have to knock it off, and they have to shove the president. Like every great bully, he will topple immediately. But if they don't shove him, he's going to keep digging in. He's going to make things worse at the Pentagon. He's going to make things worse at DHS. He's going to continue to push as long as no one is pushing back on him, Chris. And so we've got to do that. And a big shout out to the city of Philadelphia, the cradle of democracy, and Judge Baldy for denouncing these guys today.
But, you know, to your point,
go ahead,
Chris,
David.
What Rudy did today is actually going to stay Republicans' hands. Because what your takedown demonstrates, they can say, look, what do I have to put my neck out there for? Let this just burn itself out. I mean, these guys are running this into the ground. Let them appease the people who want to believe in all this stuff. And then McConnell sitting back, basically winking, saying, look, there's going to be a transition. Let's not worry about it. But nobody wants to put their political capital on the line, which is the saddest part because of the damage that's being done, because of what we talked about last night, that Republicans who are in power are happy to sit back, let Rudy and others do this work. So more and more Republicans, I don't think all, I think, you know, as Anthony describes, I think there is a schism. We see it in the business community saying, stop the nonsense. But they're happy to sit back and let more and more people think that Biden cheated because, as you would say, why? Because that means that there's more political backing for blocking what Biden wants to do, blocking what the Democrats want to do. We play very short-term politics. We get on to the midterms and set up 2024. That's our politics. And we also live in an age that George Orwell worried about, which is the loss of objective truth. And now Rudy and his cohorts play into that. And shorter cycles, less democracy. I mean, that's really what is at stake, and people have to face up to that.
What's the plus minus in the party, Anthony, in terms of the power of what David was just articulating, which we saw Kevin McCarthy say, look how many people believe this, versus how screwed are we to live with this legacy every time we want to try to have high ground in an argument in the Biden conversation, we're going to get beaten to death with this. What's the plus minus right now?
So the plus, there's a mirage going right now. The people that are with Trump want you to believe that it's all encompassing, but it's clearly not true. Like everything about Trump, underneath the surface there's great discontent. So when he leaves, there's going to be a massive schism and literally a civil war inside the party, worse than the Jerry Ford, Ronald Reagan schism. And then if they have a cleansing and a rebirth of that party, they'll be fine in 2024. If they don't, they're going right into the dustbin of history. And so we'll see what happens. This mirage of the 70 million people, Chris, they're voting for themselves. I was a blue-collar kid. They're voting because they're economically desperate and they feel left out of the system. When you talk to them on the ground, they despise the president's personality and the bellicosity of his rhetoric. Most of them do. And we can do better than this. He was the wrong messenger for their movement. And the real smart Republicans know that, and I think the fight's going to start on January 21st. But just to David's point quickly, we got to move now, though, David, because there's so much cowardice going on right now. If we don't move, none of the certifications don't end until December 1st. If you look at these certifying websites, we don't want to wait that long. Every day is damaging the integrity of our democracy, and it's changing our perception globally that we can be walked on by a demagogue. So I'm begging my Republican friends to stop.
I got you.
Well, and this is where the business community has to step up. I mean, Jamie Dimon can't be alone. He's not even a big Republican. I mean, he was aligned with Obama there for a minute, and now he's more independent. But they've got to step up and say, stop the madness here. It's going to affect everything, not just our standing in the world, but the economy, the financial markets, and all the rest. And the other hook is the pandemic. Here we have a vice president of the United States, who runs this coronavirus task force in this moment of crisis, won't take a question. I don't care whether you like Biden, don't like Biden, you're a Trump person. You ought to expect more from your leaders, especially if you say these leaders are willing to talk truth and lay it on the line and aren't afraid of consequences. They're running scared and letting Rudy Giuliani lead this effort. That's not a good day.
He said, quote, "Be alarmed, America. Serious games are afoot in Michigan." Joining us now is Jeff Timmer. He's a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. He served as one of the 2 Republicans on Michigan's Board of Canvassers from 2009 to 2012. Mr. Timmer, I'm really pleased to have you with us today. Thanks so much for your time.
I'm glad to be here. I wish it was under different circumstances. I've never seen anything so crazy and so corrupt at the same time.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to get a handle on how dangerous it is. I was struck by you calling these serious games in Michigan. It made me wonder if I spent a long time talking with my staff today about this. Should we see this as a game that we shouldn't worry too much about and that we shouldn't sort of breathe life into by covering this as a serious thing? Or is this serious enough that this could potentially be a real way that they're going to try to effectively delete this election?
Well, luckily, we have clowns running the show. I mean, if they had chimps going into court, they'd do better than what Giuliani and team is doing, and they'd be more fun to watch. But these people seem to have a way of failing upward. And so I think we do need to be alarmed. That we have clowns running the show, but they seem to kind of luck into things. And what's happening here in Michigan is they may be able to throw a wrench into the certification process. And now Trump has summoned the legislative leaders, kind of like neutered pets, to the White House saying, come here, boys, come on. And the optics of them going and listening and participating in this could be worse. But if there's no certification, there's going to be enormous pressure, even more pressure on them to certify or do something in the absence of this board taking action, and that's where things can get very dangerous, and that's why I'm alarmed.
Well, what about that state canvassers board, right? That is supposed to certify Michigan's results on Monday, now that the counties have certified their results. I know you served on that board, I believe, alongside one of the 2 current Republican members, alongside Norm Schinkel. Do you know anything about the pressure that's being put on these members?
from my understanding, the pressure is enormous. They're hearing from all kinds of people asking them to withhold their vote, to abstain, to resign, so that the board is inoperable, so that there is no certification. There's any number of things that are possible, and any number of pressures being put on them. It wouldn't surprise me if the president has also called the members of the state board, like he did the Wayne County board. There's rumors. I haven't been able to confirm that from either member. They don't like talking to me these days, but I wouldn't be surprised if they've heard from the president themselves.
The Republican leaders of Michigan's House and Senate, as you said, are headed to the White House tomorrow to meet with President Trump. You have criticized them for taking that meeting. I'm struck, though, that the Republican Senate leader, Senator Shirkey, was asked just a couple of days ago if the legislature might sort of go along with these fever dream fantasies about negating the election, overthrow the election result, put in their own pro-Trump electors. And he said very bluntly, that is not going to happen. How much faith do you have in him and in the House leader that even with the president personally weighing on them, that they'll stand up and stick up for democracy?
I have very little faith that they'll be able to stand up to this. There hasn't been a Republican in the country that's been able to stand up to Trump's nonsense over these last 4 years, and I doubt that either of these two can withstand the pressure if it actually comes to a situation where the board deadlocks, that the board doesn't certify, the court hasn't ruled in time to compel them to certify, and the legislature is looking at the clock ticking. There's a December 8th federal deadline for certification to happen, and if it hasn't happened in Michigan by that date, there's going to be enormous pressure on the legislature to take some action. And the likelihood of either of these two legislative leaders who've been involved in nonsense like the armed protests at the Capitol earlier this year, both of them were directly involved in those instances. If they couldn't stand up to these clowns that showed up at the Capitol in Michigan with long guns, there's no way they're going to stand up to somebody like Donald Trump at the White House. They're looking at political futures. The speaker is about to be unemployed. He's term limited in January. He's looking for a new job. So ask yourself. I mean, Donald Trump is a very transactional person, and there's any number of things that could happen to put pressure on these people.
Anything else?
Call or go online now to take advantage of Mike's Christmas special.
Oh, thank goodness. What happened? Where am I? The last I remember, someone was pulling me to safety. Kyle, it must have been you. You saved my life.
Well, how could I, Sergeant? I blacked out.
How? You did it on pure instinct, with the last ounce of your remaining strength. Wait, will you stop? I'm trying to congratulate Kyle. Congratulations, Kyle.
What, you mean I really did all those things?
With no thought of your own personal safety. Practically passed out yourself. You drugged me out of danger.
Really?
I guess we never know what we've got in us until there's a crisis, huh?
I guess not.
All I can say, Pyle, is thanks. I'll never forget you for this. Hey, you know what just occurred to me? I saved your life, and you saved mine. You know what that makes us? Even.
I suppose so, Sergeant, but I'm still kind of fuzzy on how I done it.
Isn't that just like him, Slater? Not only brave, but modest. He saves a life, and he doesn't even remember it. Humble. That's the word. Humble. With a heart that big. Let's hear it for a hero.
Some people come back at me and say, oh, you want to lock down the country. I don't want to do that. I just want everybody uniformly, when we're dealing with such a difficult situation right now, to do that. And you know what, Chris? We can turn it around. We can stop that. I mean, you saw the curve that Dr. Burke showed today. It's like exponential going up. You can blunt that. You don't have to accept that going up. There's something you can do about it. And as I mentioned at the conference today, vaccines are close by. They're coming. You know, I said help is on the way, which to me, I think should motivate people even more to double down, because pretty soon we're going to get a heck of a lot of help from a very efficacious vaccine. 2 vaccines that just 2 weeks ago and this past week was shown to be extremely effective. I mean, efficacious in 95% and 94.5%. You know, that's almost as good as measles vaccine, which is an extraordinary vaccine that crushed measles in this country. So, you know, we could do it, Chris. We could do it.
All right, so let's do can versus should versus will. First, do you believe the efficacy numbers hold? I am told that they are interim data, early data. This is a compressed process. First of all, bravo on Operation Warp Speed. Bravo to the Trump administration, to you and all the people who worked on it. It was worth the risk of putting that money up front to see if you lost it, you lost it. You did. Bravo. But do you think those numbers hold?
Yes, yes. I've seen the numbers. They're going to hold because you look at all the people in the study and what it was. I mean, you had a situation in the Pfizer study. You had 4 versus 90, 5 versus 90. That's a 95% effective. Those numbers are not going to change. The issue is, how long does the immunity last? How long does the protection last? We don't know that right now, but we know it works.
Okay.
That's for sure, I can tell you.
What about this question that was given to me by clinicians? Okay, we know that if you take the vaccine, you don't get as sick, but we don't know for sure that you can't be infected. I said, what's the difference? They said, well, you could still have the virus and be contagious, but you won't feel the same way. Is that true?
Right. Right. The primary endpoint of the vaccine was clinically recognizable disease, symptomatic disease. The secondary endpoints were severe disease and infection. Does it protect against infection? The data that came out indicated that of the people with the primary endpoint, clearly it was 94, 95% effective. We know also that it prevents severe disease, because if you look at the severe disease in the Pfizer study, the severe disease was 1 in the vaccine group and 9 in the placebo group. In the Moderna study, it was 0 in the vaccine group, 11 in the placebo group. So clearly it prevents severe disease and it prevents symptomatic disease. Whether or not it prevents infection, we're going to find out. But Chris, I'll take a vaccine that prevents people from getting seriously ill any day of the year.
But then it will still spread, no?
Well, not necessarily, because even though you may not, and we don't know the data yet, the data has to be thoroughly examined whether they have enough power in the study to show that it prevents infection. In other words, does it prevent somebody from getting symptomatic, but do they still have virus in them?
Yeah.
The answer may be yes, but it could be that the virus is so low in those individuals because of the immune response you get from the vaccine that they don't transmit.
All right.
We don't know that now. And you know me, Chris. I'll always admit what we don't know. We don't know that now. But the impact of a vaccine that could prevent somebody from getting ill and prevent somebody from getting seriously ill,
right,
that's huge, Chris, by anybody's standard.
Why all this confidence that we shouldn't be worried about the timing of the transition because the military has got the distribution all figured out? Don't worry about it. As soon as the vaccine is ready. Why? Why should we have confidence? We've never given a vaccine to 300 million people before, and you got an administration that's going to be in charge of it that's not going to know what the hell is going on when they get in there, and it'll almost be time to distribute it.
Well, two responses to that, Chris. The CDC distributes 80 million doses, 80 million people, not doses, but vaccinates 80 million people a year. Mm-hmm. So the idea that this is the first time it's being done, the first time you're going to get 300 million, but this is a situation where the CDC does this every year. That's the first thing.
300 is more than 80.
The transition, no, it is, I know, but, well, Chris, if you're talking about transitions, I don't want to get involved in the politics of it, except to tell you, as I've told you before, that I've been involved now for 36 years with 6 administrations. I've been in 5 transitions. Transitions are obviously important. You do better with transitions. I've been through them, and I know I use the metaphor, it's like a relay race. When you're running in a relay race, you have the baton, you give it to somebody who's not standing still. You give it to somebody that's actually starting to run. That makes the smooth transition. Of course, that's better than not doing it that way.
Better. Help us understand that. What big difference is there that you're not able to talk to Biden's people right now, and you may not be able to for a month and a half?
I mean, it's obvious, Chris, that when you're handing something over to someone else, you want to get them briefed in before the very first day they start. You know, that's what the word transition means, that you're transitioning from one phase to another, as opposed to stop and then start from a dead stop. I mean, it's much more preferable to transition in. Everybody knows that. I've done it 5 times already with 6 administrations.
Other than the vaccine, when there is a new administration, how aggressive will you be in pushing that they own testing? Use the Defense Production Act, start ramping up the reagents that we need for this FDA-approved home test, because even if you can afford the $50 for the machine and whatever the reagents and the other chemicals will cost, and a lot of people won't be able to unless it's financed by the federal government, we're going to have a shortage on the manufacturing side. You need more tests, different kinds of tests, and you know it. How aggressive will you be in making that a priority after what you've learned over these past months?
Well, I have been for a long time now very, very much pushing the idea that you need to test people who are in the asymptomatic group. You need to, I've used the word, it was months ago, Chris, to flood the system with testing so you can get a feel for the penetrance of this community spread, which is asymptomatic spread. I've been in that corner for a long time, and I'm not going to change.
But how big a difference will it make if the federal government starts subsidizing the tests, creating different types of tests for different kinds of situations, and using the production aspects of their capabilities to get more of these materials out there for people? Because this 150 million test buy sounds impressive only to the uninitiated. That's a drop in the bucket. It would last a week for a couple of communities in trouble.
Chris, you know what I'd like to see? And I would push for this very, very hard. In addition to the standard, highly specific, highly sensitive test that you do if you want to know that this person is infected, you want to do identification, isolation, contact tracing. That's good. I like that. But the thing I would be pushing for is something that's a home test, that's point of care, that you can do yourself.
Yes.
Because if you can do that, you can get a situation where someone would know whether they're infected or whether the family they're bringing over for dinner is infected.
Isn't that what the FDA just approved?
Point of care. Right, exactly, but you need to have a lot of that. That's something that's just the first step. You want to be able to do it, it requires a prescription. I'd like to see one where you don't even require a prescription.
How do you do that?
That's what we need. Sensitive, well, you just develop it. You get the companies to go ahead and do it and say, this is something you really need. We need to be able to have a good, firm handle on who's infected and who's not. And let me tell you why, Chris. Because right now, what we're seeing throughout the country, that innocent get-togethers of family and friends in a home where people let their guard down because they're with people they're familiar with. We're starting to see those kinds of infections. 8, 10 people get together at a dinner with friends and family. One of them is infected, but with no symptoms. They put their guard down. You're sitting, you're eating, you're drinking, you take your mask off, and that's how we're starting to see infections. I get on the phone and I talk to all of my colleagues around the country. Almost every one of them say that's becoming a very important source of infection. The gathering, the innocent gathering. If you had a test that you could do at home yourself, point of care, sensitive and specific, you can eliminate a lot of that.
But that doesn't
so that's
sound
the
like
kind of testing that I'm in favor of.
That doesn't sound like new thinking. I feel like that's been obvious for a long time. Why don't we have it?
Yeah, that's the point. Let's stop thinking about it. Let's just do it. I mean, you're asking me what I would want to do.
Right.
I'd want to do it now. I'd want to do it a month from now, a year from now.
But how long ago could we have done it?
You know, Chris, I don't know. You make those guesstimates and then people start doing calculations of how many people could not have been infected and it gets, you know where it goes. It gets soundbite.
Fine.
I don't want to do that.
2 more points of contention. 1, schools, okay? I am an antagonist, full disclosure, to the idea of how we're handling schools. It doesn't make sense to me, Doc, that one case closes down a whole school. They don't have any real ways of getting you testing. They have different kinds of tests in different periods. New York City just shut down all the schools. The rate in the city is 3%. What's magic about 3%? The rate in the schools is 0.17%. Why close the schools? Why not close everything else before you close the schools? What am I getting wrong?
You get nothing wrong. I agree with you completely. I think one of the things we need to do is, to the best of our capability, try to keep the kids in school. The numbers you said are true. If you look at the rate of infectivity, I mean, obviously, you want to be sensitive to the safety and the health of the children. You
And
want
the
to have a
teachers
plan
and the families
of how
and
to
the
deal
staff.
with it.
I get it.
And of course, the teachers, you want to do that. Having said that, you check that box. You want to make sure you're sensitive and you do whatever you can to protect the children and protect the teachers, because then indirectly you're protecting other people. Having said that, my feeling is the default position, keep the schools open if you possibly can. And you're absolutely correct. I agree with you completely on that.
So why aren't more people upset about this?
Bring Joe and Hunter, and, you know, their lack of interest in anything involving this case, you know, this is more evidence of what we know, that they're biased. Abusively so.
Yeah, listen, listen, we saw it all throughout the last 4 years. I have something tonight that gets you to facts, Sean. This is what we want, right? This is an affidavit that Just the News obtained today. It's from Stephen Miller, a Yale-trained, Princeton-trained mathematician, data scientist. He participated in a project where we reviewed high-risk ballots in Pennsylvania. And he says, under the penalty of perjury, using his statistical expertise, that there were between 80 and 100,000 ballots that either didn't get counted in Pennsylvania, that came from Republicans, or that were requested in the name of another person, meaning the person who voted or got the ballot wasn't the person who requested it. He's putting his name to this 100,000 votes. Why is that important? The spread in Pennsylvania between Trump and Biden is below that number. It's about 80,000 at last count. This is the sort of gumshoe work that can help Americans understand, is this issue real or not? And in every state that we've looked at, we're seeing identical statistics, data, witnesses, affidavits. There is something real here. How big it is, we don't know yet. But the facts say there's something very irregular going on in some of these big cities where elections were conducted.
You know, Cheryl Atkinson, by the way, your new book is phenomenal. Congratulations, I got my copy. Very well done. So you were willing to look into these baseless charges of Trump-Russia collusion. They were proven false. You were willing to look at the double standard with Ukraine and Joe and Hunter. They ignore the corruption there. Now you see that the media has no interest whatsoever, because isn't it for them about the result? I say media is dead, journalism's dead. I think they're part of a mob that is all things protect Joe Biden. They didn't ask Joe Biden tough questions, let him hide in his basement bunker. I think we got a real big information problem in this country that is getting worse by the day. Thoughts?
We do, and I think you touched on this when you talked about the comparative behavior and coverage that some of the same in the news media gave to the disproven, in the end, theory that President Trump somehow colluded with Russia President Putin to take the 2016 election. Think of all the bandwidth that was given to this theory, this conspiracy theory that proved not to be true, but almost no journalistic rational skepticism or curiosity applied to the 2020 elections, knowing in advance, as we were told, that Russia and China would try to interfere, perhaps foreign countries, that we had bad domestic actors that have done improper and illegal things in the recent past, some of them inside our own very government. A neutral, unconflicted press would have been on the ground, those covering politics, looking for improprieties from every side, particularly in the swing states, rather than sitting back and declaring that the evidence come knocking on the door and present itself to them, and that guilty parties come and admit what they've done, and then declare, if that doesn't happen, that there simply is no reason to have any skepticism about this process.
You know, Cheryl, I kind of have a lot of faith in people. Now, you might have partisans, maybe a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, that would come forward, sign a legal affidavit under the threat of perjury, and maybe lie because their candidate, they want their candidate to win. I don't think hundreds of Americans would put themselves in legal jeopardy. I know I wouldn't, because I'd be put in jail for spitting on the sidewalk. But separate issue. You know, they just dismiss it out of hand. And meanwhile, they took on all of the lies of Russia and ignored all of the massive double standard with Hunter and Joe. Thoughts?
I spent a little time looking at some of the affidavits and evidence and video, and of course it will be up to other people to decide whether a certain burden of proof is met. But certainly there are reasons to ask questions. There's plenty of smoke. Not only are there lawyers in some cases who have filed sworn affidavits with very specific details, but there's at least one case, a Democrat observer in a city who recognized and saw improprieties that he has signed a sworn affidavit attesting to that. So it's not just a bunch of, as you said, Republican partisans, and a critical press, a neutral press would look at these and at least say, there's something here that deserves a lot of investigation rather than just dismissing it out of hand on the front end.
Congrats on the new book. Good to see you. Greg, thank you. John Solomon, justthenews.com, thank you. When we come back, Lawrence Jones asking New Yorkers about the CDC wanting people not to travel or even have Thanksgiving, draconian lockdowns in other places. Also, we'll check in with Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Jason Chaffetz as we continue.
And you know, we're talking about mRNA biology. And I almost felt bad we were taking so much time of his. But what I understood, what I saw in him, you know, the wheels going on, he was thinking about what are the implications for governing, for the country, and most importantly, what effect this was having on people. It was extraordinary. We would sometimes sit there for 2 hours at a time. He's a very quick study. If you go back and you listen to the presidential debates, I think he's probably the only president who will ever talk about a reproduction number.
Dr. Kessler, you mentioned Dr. Vivek Murthy, former Surgeon General, and you and he and the other members of the coronavirus task force. I mean, it was such a relief to not see, you know, cable news personalities and like people who run pillow companies and like all the other like kind of quacks and liminal influencers that the president has chosen to listen to here. But the sort of after that initial relief, it has made a lot of us start thinking about what it means to have a president who takes science seriously, who wants to put science at the forefront of the decision making here, and who's not afraid to let scientists communicate the reality of what's going on to the public. I'm thinking about what these next couple of months is going to be like, and looking at those numbers and thinking about what our hospitalization and death rates are going to be like. Do you anticipate, you and your other coronavirus task force members with the president, do you anticipate personally briefing and doing that kind of public communication as we go into what's going to be a real dark couple of months?
Absolutely. You know, the president-elect very much believes in restoring trust, in putting science first. You know, clear, uniform, evidence-based guidance. He understands that. And he understands that it's very important to help all states, not seeing them as red states or blue states. He has enormous respect for science and expertise. And that's him.
Dr. Kessler, I don't want to go into detail on this tonight, and I'd like to have you back to have a longer discussion about it in coming days. But I wondered if you could just give us a précis right now, the short version of whether or not we should be scared and concerned about the lack of a transition in terms of handling both the safety assessment for potential vaccines and the planning for vaccine distribution. I feel like I have heard enough from you and your colleagues who have been advising Vice President Biden that I know that your thinking is far advanced on these matters, and it feels like your planning is far advanced on these matters. I don't have very much hope that the Trump transition is going to turn on anytime soon and that the existing work that's been done is going to be conveyed to you in an organized manner. Should we be concerned that you'll be very hamstrung and unable to do that basic work that'll set us back weeks or even months while the transition remains stunted?
Absolutely. I mean, it's very concerning. We can work with anyone. I've worked with Republican and Democratic administrations We have to work with our colleagues at Warp Speed, at CDC, at FDA. We can't lose a day here.
Dr. David Kessler, co-chair of the Biden Coronavirus Task Force, former commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, an esteemed, accomplished public servant doing back into that work now in a very different way. Sir, thanks for doing this first interview with us since the election. We look forward to having you back whenever you can be here.
Stay safe, Rich.
I will do. Thank you. All right. I mentioned earlier that